Thinking is doing when it thinks. We are looking for this question, okay? So what thinking is doing is something going on beyond thinking, beyond thinking's back. That's why it's called transcendental. And since it deals with the objects of thinking, okay, it's called ideal. Therefore, you should not confuse it with transcendentalism or idealism, etc. Okay, it has nothing to do with it. Okay, I was talking about the a priori categories of human consciousness, okay, or understanding. Now, I was saying that these categories are, so to speak, universal logical relations. If you like, okay, it's the structure of understanding is nothing else than pure formal logic, okay? Now, the intuitions, in a rather messy fashion, arriving at the boundary of our understanding, which is our sensibility. Okay, now the categories begin to work on them, so to speak, okay? Categories, or if you like, these a priori, prior to any possible experience, universal logical relationalities, okay, were put in motion, okay, acquiring a certain content through the arrival of the intuitions, okay, they work. Now, in other words, while I have these relationalities, P and not P, acquiring specific contents, if you like, now it's through the operation of these categories one turns out to be able to classify and differentiate this messy bunch of incoming intuitions. Now, while these a priori categories operate on the intuitions, they develop concepts, okay? So you should not confuse categories with concepts. They are themselves concepts, but concepts of pure relationalities, okay? However, the concepts now I am talking about, okay, are the newly produced abstractions arrived at as a result of the operation of these categories, a priori categories, on the incoming intuitions. Okay? So I have my sensations and I have a certain logical structure in my consciousness, and while sensations arrive at my consciousness, my logical structures of thinking begins to operate, okay, work on those intuitions, and interestingly enough, begins to differentiate, classify them, and unite them in certain entities, wholes. Okay? This, what Kant calls as experience. Yeah? So, according to Kant, talking about an experience can only be possible when these concepts are applied onto incoming intuitions, the mass of intuitions, okay? Simply because it's through only concepts. It's through only concepts. Actually, categories themselves cannot relate directly with the incoming intuition, so they produce concepts to deal with those intuitions, and each and every concept acquiring its specific content through the incoming intuitions, okay? So, in other words, this means that what we call the entity this was a thinking of the end of the 18th century, but as you'll see, it's quite radical. What we call the entity, okay, entity meaning something having a certain unity in its own self, okay. What we call the entity is nothing else than the result of the operation of the concepts. Okay? Kant talks about it as the unifying power of the concepts. Okay? So, for instance, such kind of visual intuitions arriving at me, such kind of tangible intuitions as well are arriving at me, such kind of audio sensations, etc., arriving at me, and it's through the operation of the concept. All these different, seemingly unrelated intuitions are united under one single category of the object, chair. Okay? So, the very constitution of the unity of the entity chair owes its unity not to its own being over there, but to the operation of the categories and concepts. Think, for instance, about the possible results of such an argumentation in sociological study. I was asking you whether any of you has seen the Society. Or domestic labor. Huh? Or as a category, immigrants. You may have seen one or two, say 10, say a couple of hundred of immigrants. But what about the category of the immigrants? What about the category of the society, Turkish society? Now, where did they come? All we have experienced in actuality were nothing else than particular individuals, and not in their totality. Only through their certain aspects. I meet the shopkeeper in his shop. I meet the lawyer in his bureau. I meet the other guys in their some or this or that places. Never in their totality. Okay. You meet me as the instructor. Okay. However, we come to talk about these individuals as if we are knowing them and as if they are nothing else than the unity of that particular individual. Where did you get the idea? We were talking about ideas, transcendental idealism. Okay? Where are those bunch of people? In which of their aspects we come to recognize them? Okay? For instance, in my earlier example, we only try to measure two aspects, two of their aspects, level of income and level of education, and arriving at their potential aptitude for criminality. We are doing indeed strange things here in this world. So this owes, so the unity of the entity, that individual, I myself, the unity of myself as well, we will see, okay, owes its unity not to the unity of my being as such, but to the concept, according to the Kantian argumentation. Okay? It is so powerful, so strong, that power of unifying power of the concept. Okay? We will see this simply because somewhere here he touches upon the question of the subject, self. Okay? The subject or consciousness tends to think itself as a unified subject. But the problem is, according to Kantian thinking, in our actual existence, taking the operations of the consciousness into suspense, okay, you'll find out that what he calls the empirical self is nothing else than, just like the intuitions, a bunch of a manifold of a flux of intuitions, and as such, he would conclude it is something unintelligible, unknowable. Okay? The empirical self. Even if we may insist that there may be an empirical actual self over there beneath the consciousness, you know, causation forces us to think that consciousness should work somewhere, okay? Therefore, we posit that consciousness is nothing else than the result of a working of our brain, so to speak, okay? So we perhaps may too readily up to connect the idea of mind and consciousness with the workings of brain, okay? So consciousness is inside the brain, and the brain is inside my body and my consciousness constituting the unity of that particular individual named Erdoğan. Okay? Now, however, when you take away the consciousness, you would not be able to find what you refer to yourself as the self. Okay? That's the problem. Taking away or suspending the operations of consciousness does not allow you, would not allow you in any way to approach what you may call your empirical, actual, real self. Okay? In other words, you would not be able to answer any question whatsoever running like this: know thyself. Okay? Now, what about the claims of knowing thyself? Okay? Knowing thyself requires the operations of consciousness, whose primary function is to enforce that unifying power of the concept onto the intuitions. So what do you arrive at as a result of the operations of consciousness can never ever be your actual self, but a conceptualized self generated out of the operations of that fucking a priori categories. Okay? So this he would call as the transcendental subject. Okay? Now, therefore, what the consciousness conceives itself as a particular self is nothing else than the result of its operation. Okay? And its primary operation is to unify, or if you like, in somewhere else, he would say, this would be important, enforce. Enforce the concepts and categories onto intuitions. Okay? Now, of course, as you can see, the Kantian position, this is called the Kantian position that consciousness cannot take anything which does not belong to its own structure already inside, okay, means that consciousness had been encapsulated into itself. In other words, consciousness can never leave itself behind, okay, and can never take anything which does not already belong to itself inside. Okay? So all it deals with are nothing else than sensations and ideas, not the things themselves, and therefore creating a very radical, sharp, therefore for most of the scientists, unsatisfactory division between the world of the consciousness and its outside. This encapsulated character of the consciousness is referred by the term imminency, the immanent character of consciousness, or consciousness is immanent, meaning that it cannot go out of itself. Okay? So that's why I draw it on the board in a rather circular fashion. Okay? So consciousness is immanent means it cannot leave itself behind. Okay? Okay, this enforcing a radical, quite radical operation and division in our world. Not in the Cartesian sense, but this time rather even more radical differentiation. Okay, think about this. all these intuitions that are finally unified under the structures of concepts as a result of the operation of my a priori categories show themselves as entities in my consciousness, okay, to my understanding. So, therefore, the chair shows itself to my understanding as a unified particular this something, okay? Otherwise, what it emanates to my sensibility is nothing else than infinite number of intuitions, okay? So the task here is to unify these intuitions as to stand for objects. Now, therefore, in Kantian thinking, you know, usually when we say object and subject, okay, we tend to assume that the subject, as we are here standing and facing the world of the objects, which there are, okay? They are there and I am here, okay? So the object, I suppose that, is something external to me, okay? Now, according to Kantian thinking, this cannot be possible, okay? Simply because all I know, all I can ground my knowledge upon is nothing else than intuitions, not the external objects themselves, okay? All I know is nothing else than what I see, what I smell, what I touch, what I hear, okay? So, all my knowledge is based upon this. Otherwise, as I see, if I didn't see it, if I didn't hear it, if I didn't touch it, smell it, in any way sense it, okay, I wouldn't be aware of it. So we are talking about the structure of being aware, okay, consciousness. I wouldn't be aware of it, which means that, practically speaking at least, it would not exist for me, okay? It may exist for you, but not for me. I wouldn't be aware of its existence, in other words, okay? So my awareness is not based upon nothing else than my own intuitions, okay? And my intuitions as such do not make any sense, but to be able to make sense of them, okay, I have to enforce the unifying power of the concept onto them, therefore producing objects in my consciousness. So in Kantian terminology, contrary to commonsensical thinking, an object, Gegenstand, actually object is the Latin word, or German Gegenstand, means that which stands over there, facing me, in front of me, okay? That which is over there, standing in front of me, okay? Ob iectum. Iectum means standing over, okay? And ob means before. Gegen means against, okay? Against me, before me. So that which standing before me. But all those, that which were standing before me, according to Kant, are nothing else than in my consciousness, okay? Simply because all the intuitions that I get, okay, are not organized, and the possibility of making sense of them requires the operation of the a priori structures, okay? Otherwise, for instance, if I didn't have any concept of human being, if I didn't have any concept of male and female, for instance, I would not be able to differentiate you from rest of the other animate beings, for instance. Or I would not be able to differentiate male and female students here in this class as well, okay? So, the a priori category is working on the incoming sensations, intuitions, okay? Creating concepts. Therefore, I am having the concepts of sexuality. I would not prefer to say gender, okay? Having the concepts of sexuality, therefore, being capable of making such distinctions. Okay? Otherwise, and if I apply this to sociological knowledge, if you do not have the concept, in other words, okay, you wouldn't be able to find out what's going on over there. Okay? What's itself going over there, strangely enough, does not give the concept to the sociologist. Okay? The concept has to be generated somewhere where we are going to look for it later on. Okay? Actually, what we call theory is nothing else than this. Searching a position, searching an acceptable position with regard to this question. Okay? Okay, fine. A priori categories functioning on the incoming stimuli or intuition and making these, producing the content of the consciousness, so to speak, okay, in the form of objects. Kant would also call them, borrowing a term from the ancient Greek thinkers, as German Erscheinung or Greek phenomenon. Okay? So the world of consciousness is a phenomenal world. World of, if you like, translate into English, world of appearances. World of the things as they appear to the structures of the consciousness. Or if you like, to the structures of being aware. Okay? As they appear. Appearances. Okay? Now the term appearances, as you can understand, already implies a primary cause as to cause these appearances in my consciousness. As my discussion about the intuitions, the possibility of having intuitions should have already implied it. Okay? Now, I say that the intuitions are coming into my consciousness. The usual proposition is that the intuitions are coming into my consciousness from outside. Right? So there's going to be an outside of my consciousness. But Kant was very careful on that point, simply because it's quite easy to make an error here and to say that, you know, because there is an outside world and because it's full of things, these things, okay, emanating all these stimuli which arrive at me in the form of intuitions. For instance, the whiteness of or solidness of the desk should be considered as belonging to the desk, not to my sensibility, okay? And my sensation of solidness, my sensation of white color, etc., are all due to the outside existence of that object called the desk. Now, this would be nothing else than making a truth claim which you cannot support. Simply because, don't forget, consciousness cannot come out of itself, and one of the primary reasons for that is this, okay? It cannot know outside of its own self, okay? In other words, it can only know what's going on inside of its own self, okay? It can only know an appearance, if you like, a phenomenal object, if you like. It can know a phenomenal object, but it cannot even say that the appearance of that particular phenomenal object is due to an outside cause, the outside existence of a desk functioning as the cause of the triggering of that particular appearance in my awareness, in my consciousness. Okay? Why? Simply because all it can deal is not the object over there, but its own intuitions. Okay? So, if we are gonna, therefore, we are gonna delimit rather sharply our knowledge claims, okay, and simply say that our knowledge does not extend to the world of the things so-called in themselves. Okay? But only to the world of the phenomena as they appear in our structure of being aware. Okay? This creates a very sharp contrast with the earlier thinking. I say earlier thinking is still predominant in contemporary spontaneous, let me call it, ideology of the scientist. The world is over there and we are going there just to study it and acquire its knowledge. Oh, it's not that so it appears. Okay? It's not that easy. The world is not over there. The world is exactly right here. Okay? Another important point was that, let me present you the third component of the consciousness and finish with it for today. Okay? Reason, Vernunft, understanding, Verstehen. Okay? These distinctions are important simply because it is through reason. I'll try to explain next time. It's through reason. Consciousness establishes its unity, its own unity. Okay? Now, we will see. Later on, we are going to criticize this point of view. But let me say this, okay? That much will be enough for today, okay? When consciousness operates through enforcing the unifying power of the concept. I say the concept simply because any concept, okay? Any concept. Unifying power of the concept, it exercises this unifying power onto itself as well, therefore making itself, turning itself into some phenomenal subject this time, okay? So, the subject and object we are talking about here within this framework are all belong to the phenomenal world. What's outside? Kant would call this as the nominal world or the world of the things in themselves. Türkçesi kendi içinde şeyler galiba. Things in themselves, okay? And things in themselves meaning that things as not they appear to me, but as they are, as such, in their own state. Okay? Now, the world of things in themselves, or the nominal world, actually is a very critical question, simply because most of us, as I told you, are ready to suppose that the reason for our having these appearances, the phenomenal world, is the effects of this nominal world. Okay? But nominal means, if not the world of things in themselves, the term nominal means, and Kant explains this in a footnote to his Critique of Pure Reason, nominal means the things which we think that exist at the externality of our understanding. Okay? This means that since the limit of our knowledge cannot exceed the limits of our consciousness, okay, our knowledge can never be sure that there is or that there is not a world of things or nominal things. But we tend to think that there has to be such a nominal world. Why? Because as a result of the functioning of one of the very important categories of the structure of our understanding, causation. We always, when we encounter with an event, we are always used to think that event must be caused by some prior event. Okay? So we deal with the event as if it is an effect and search for its cause. Okay? So here, this same position applies, or if you like, this same habit applies in our dealing with the origin of our intuitions. Okay? If I am having intuitions, I must think that if I am having intuitions, therefore they have to be a cause. Okay? There has to be a cause, okay? And this cause must be some certain external event or world, okay, creating certain sensations in me, okay? But one has to be careful in that regard simply because such a thinking is nothing else than the way of thinking according to the category of causation. In other words, Kant would insist that, and the results are quite important, Kant would insist that our knowledge, our understanding can never exceed its own limits, okay? And can say things about the external existence, okay? So we should live, whose importance we are going to see in the coming session, okay? So let me stop here, and next time we are going to continue with Kant, and I made a modification in the syllabus devoting Kant at least 2 sessions.